Episode 3 of Monarch is out. This was probably the best episode so far, but I think it's also probably time to concede that this entire show was a bait and switch. I kind of wonder if this was one of those shows that someone was originally trying to get made, and they're like, oh, what if we add Godzilla into the plot and title and pretend that it's a monster show, but that's not really what it is. And that's sort of what it feels like we're dealing with here. That's just me speculating. I don't know for sure. So we pick up where we left off from episode 2. Kurt Russell is telling the main cast, like, hey, it's time to go. And, you know, we get like a little high-speed chase thing where he tries to hotwire a car, but they have buttons now. But he also knows what Google is, but doesn't know what button cars are, whatever. And then once they get out of this facility, they just appear again on a shipping container boat toward Korea. And we get none of the logistics about how they escaped from Monarch or how Kurt Russell had these connections or anything. And this is present day, obviously, Kurt Russell. And they even acknowledged the point that I made in my previous video when I said he's a weird casting choice because his character is supposed to be like in his 90s. And Kurt Russell in real life is like 72. And because he's, you know, a Hollywood actor, he looks really good for 72. So they have him like running around and he's the driver for this high-speed chase. And it's just one of those things that if you ever think about it during the show, it'll probably take you out of it. Because if you see your grandparents in their 70s, they're frail and weak usually. So if you're getting close to 80s, 90s, they begin to look like skeletal and, you know, need people to take care of them and they can't run. So I really don't understand why they didn't just bump the past plotline up like 25 years or move the present day plotline back same amount. Not really sure why they made that decision for casting or even writing to have a character be in his 90s who a lot of the action relies on. We jump back to the past plotline and Keiko and Randa and young Lee Shaw are asking the military for funding to try to capture whatever these monsters are, either in person or on film or whatever. And the way that they convince this general is by showing him this giant footprint. And he's like, what made this? And they say, we don't know. But he concedes they need to find out what it is, while also saying, for now, it's just a mud pit. So until you show me something, we can't give you funding. And they go through all their backgrounds and their qualifications and, you know, blah, blah, blah. She does the whole it's doctor thing again, which is really obnoxious. In the end, they explain to him about the weird radioactivity, and they say that we need 150 pounds of uranium to attract one of these monsters. So he agrees to that, even though he mentions that's how much they used on Hiroshima. We also get this little conversation here where Randa in particular is insulting Lee and just the military in general, pretty much calling them a bunch of brutes and baboons and saying that they're too stupid to understand what's going on and how significant it really is. Of course, his theory for why the monsters were there but hadn't been seen, that he was going to tell the general, was that teleportation was how the monsters were moving. But Lee cuts him off and gives a more political answer so they can actually get what they want. So he's supposed to be like your stereotypical scientist type who just loves the science and blah, blah, blah. We go back to the present time, and somehow they got their car to a shipping container without anyone knowing. And they're essentially trying to smuggle themselves into Korea for some guy that Lee has contact with that can get them to Alaska by plane, because the STEM girl, May, already made digital copies of everything. So they throw all the physical copies overboard, and she has them all on her laptop. And Kate is frustrated because she wants to make her dad out to be the villain. Kentaro is still kind of defending him and wants to find him. And Kate's like, I just want to be left alone by Monarch. I don't care regardless. We go back to the past, and you jump forward a little bit to where they actually got the uranium they asked for, and they got it in bomb form. So Keiko's really pissed off. Randa's pissed off. Lee is trying to help, be like, hey, this isn't what we agreed to. And the general guy's like, look, we're dealing with some unknown monster, and you asked the military for help. So you're going to get military help, which essentially means that they're planning to blow up whatever it was that made the footprint. And this whole part of the story I find a bit frustrating because they have Keiko be like the I just love the science and the creatures and we need to study them type. And they have the general be like, we don't know what we're dealing with, let's blow it up. Which I think is fair when you're talking about giant unknown radioactive monsters or monsters that feed off radiation or whatever. But I think it would have been more interesting if Keiko had been more of like, this is her life's work and her ambition, more than like the environment hippie kind of bullshit, protect the animals. Because any reasonable person, even if you're a scientist, I would hope would understand you can't just have giant monsters roaming around and not putting people in danger. It's just not how it works. especially when you're talking about something that dwarves all other land creatures based on that footprint. So I think they kind of missed an opportunity there to make this conflict a little bit more interesting and less one-sided. Because the way that the show wants you to think is that the military is bad, we need to protect the environment, we need to protect the animals, and the scientists are just clearly in the right. And there's no debate or discussion. We go back to the present, and Kentaro is trying to talk to May, and May is essentially like, fuck you, you ruined my life. And Kentaro apologizes, which I'm pretty sure he did last episode also. He's like, look, I didn't know that me bringing you some old tapes from my dad was going to lead to all of this. And she's just like not having it. And this is another one where the guy comes off as really kind of just weak and like a loser and not really standing up for himself at all. And the show portrays it as she's in the right just to be a total bitch. And I don't think it's unreasonable for her to be frustrated, but I think it's also unfair for the show to frame this conversation as she's completely in the right and should just be as pissed off as she wants to at him for something that was completely unknown and out of his control. And when he apologizes in this one, she says, fair enough. But then she continues being like, I don't want you around me. Fuck you. I don't want any part of this. So it's a really weird dynamic going on here. And honestly, the whole present line in this episode, like outside of the first 5 minutes when you get the car chase and the last 5 minutes, the rest of the episode is just kind of like drama filler. And that's the sort of thing that makes me speculate that this was supposed to be some kind of other show. And they were like, oh, we need to latch on to a brand like Godzilla in the monster world. And then we can get our show made and we'll just minimize those parts. They come out here and start attacking Lee because they're trying to figure out their game plan. And Kentaro is mad that Lee wants to throw the physical tapes away because they'll get taken immediately at the border when they land in South Korea. And Kentaro kind of throws a tantrum, and they all do, about like, why are you in charge? And Lee is like, okay, well, how do you want to handle this then? Once we get to South Korea, you can run the show. And then they're all immediately like, oh, kind of like, never mind, we'll let you lead because we don't know what we're doing. So Lee is getting escorted to the back of the truck at Korean Customs because they don't have passports and they're not supposed to be there, clearly. And then one of the guards hits Lee and then hits the other guard and tosses the guard in the back of the truck. So now they're together. This guy just takes his jacket off and he's like, okay, Lee, come on, let's go to my plane. Again, like the logistics of all this and how they're escaping and all that, no clue. We get a quick cut to Tim. Tim's getting his ass chewed out by his boss, who, again, is a woman. And, you know, I'm just going to keep pointing it out because when there's enough instances, I'm not giving the benefit of the doubt. And the girls are all in charge of everything in this show. So I'm just not giving them the benefit of the doubt that that's not a deliberate choice to promote women in power or whatever. And it's just annoying. It's the kind of thing where once you notice, you're like, wow, all of the men are fucking losers. So the boss lady is tearing Tim a new asshole. Eventually, she asked the Russian chick if she knew what they were doing and says she wants them to go find Lee and ask what she needs. And she says that she needs Tim because of all the files and information they have, and she doesn't really know what any of it is about. So we cut, they made it to their destination. Again, logistics ignored. And it's an old junker plane that they're going to fly from Korea to Alaska. And they figured out the coordinates along the way. We go back to the past and we see this like super undisciplined military thing where they're all literally just sitting on beach chairs watching this bomb, and Godzilla shows up. And the special effects look solid, I think, probably because Godzilla's not hardly in the show at all. So obviously he gets close. They're going to blow Godzilla up, or what they think they're doing is blowing him up. And Keiko tries to run and stop the signal from sending, and Lee tackles her. And she's really upset and being like, oh, what have we done? Blah, blah, blah. And yeah, I mean, the scene itself is fine. Like I said, I think they missed an opportunity with the motivations of the characters, though, and kind of framing this as a black and white issue instead of a gray issue, I just didn't think was smart. And also, this to me seems to be the way they're going to excuse Godzilla not showing up in the past timeline again, because at the beginning of the show, they make it sound like the Titans are make-believe, like people just don't believe that they're real, even though Godzilla attacked San Francisco a few years prior. So I'm assuming that the only way they believe this is because Godzilla goes into hiding again from the past timeline to the present timeline, which is like 50 years. So again, this is the type of stuff that makes me think it's just a bait and switch and that the show was never actually intended to be about Godzilla. He's had about 2 minutes of screen time in 3 episodes. So May is the problem solver for the group, and they're flying on this little junker plane just in the general direction of Alaska without actually knowing where they're going, which they even point out in the show that Alaska is massive, but they just kind of gloss over it 5 minutes later by fixing it. So they adjust their route slightly to a place that I haven't heard of, and that's where they fly toward. In the past timeline, Lee is telling Keiko and Randa that his request for however many millions of dollars got denied, and the general said, that what they asked for was not nearly enough and that they upped it a ton. So they're going to get this massive funding to kind of start Monarch and have bases all over the world. And it's going to be their job to find these Titans. And they're pretty much responsible for keeping them secret. And Lee just says, I have to report anything you tell me. As in, don't tell anybody. And this is, again, how they justify the monsters being secret for 50 years, even though they're giant monsters that leave footprints in places. Here we get a conversation between the guy flying the plane, Dong, and Kate, and she's essentially saying that she doesn't know if she wants to find her dad dead or alive, like which would be worse. And she gets a little lecture here about, appreciating life and the time you have and not being afraid of tomorrow and just kind of having to get up each day and do what you can. And it seems to convince her after she's been like a 100% screw my dad train for the entire show so far. So they fix their route. Now they know where they're going for some reason in the mountains. Lee flies the plane because I guess he's the best driver and pilot. And for some reason he has to fly super low and close to these mountains. And they make a crash landing in like the middle of a big flat snow area. It's okay. It's not terrible, but, not great either. You have the whole thing where Lee is 90 something doing all the flying and driving, and he was in essentially imprisonment, but knows how to use Google and has contacts on the outside and knows how to fly a more modern plane. And just none of the logistics make sense for this show. And they kind of just off-screen it, which if it's not important, like somebody going to the bathroom, fine. But when they're smuggling themselves around the world, kind of good to know. Anyway, they land, they're walking around, and they see a tent with a bunch of stuff in it, and they recognize the handwriting as Kentaro and Kate's dad's handwriting, but he's not there currently. The guy Dong sees like claw marks on the other crashed plane, and is like, oh no, get back to the plane, I'll taxi it, you guys hop on. So he's the only one in there, and it wakes up this monster titan beast thing. And we found a guy earlier in the crash plane frozen to death, and that's what this thing does to the guy Dong. So we end on kind of a cliffhanger where they're in Alaska, there's a monster there, don't know where the dad is. Guess we'll find out how they get out of this next time. But the monster freezes the guy to death with like his breath. So I'm not sure how you would even escape from something like this. It's huge, and you're in a big, flat, snowy area. My assumption is that the dad will show up and know a way to scare it off or kill it or whatever. So yeah, overall, probably the best episode. Still a lot of things that I think aren't particularly good in it. A couple missed opportunities, a lot of stuff that's unexplained that I think should be. And at this point, I pretty much have to just accept that it's not a Godzilla show. And that's really all there is to it. All right, I'll be back for episode 4. Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. Subscribe. I'm curious to see what other people think. Are you upset about the bait and switch? Do you not care because you like it? Do you think it's terrible? Let me know. See ya. Thanks.